Hello, this is Dr. Jeff, and we are here trying to understand the roots of Saigu. We began with episode 1, and we learned so much about the roots of Saigu and the context. And today we want to delve a little bit more and try to see if we can understand the flashpoint of Saigu. It didn't happen in that day. There were elements that led up to Saigu 429. But before we begin, Hey Pin, could you go ahead and once again introduce yourself and your organization?
Sure. My name is Hey Pin M. I run a nonprofit called Faith and Community Empowerment, or FACE. We say we seek to bring the face of God through service and lift those who are faceless. And just a real quick, one piece is that since we're talking about Saigu, during the LA riots, I saw our community depicted in such a negative light. And it was partly because we did not have leaders in the decision-making room. And our community also lacked a lot of resources and economically challenged. And I think that led to a lot of different challenges and tensions. And as such, part of the work that we are doing is connecting opportunities and resources, as well as lifting up the AAPI community's contribution, as well as needs, and facilitating and fostering partnerships that I think really create mutuality and understanding.
And I know we talked about in the first episode, but very briefly, what happened on Saigu, the 1992 LA riots? Just really briefly.
So real briefly, there were over $1 billion in property damage that resulted from a riot that broke out after Rodney King, an African-American individual who was basically brutally beaten by the police. But when the results came, basically the police had no jail time. And during the same season when Rodney King was captured on camera with the police brutally beating him, and then it took a year in terms of the court trials. At a similar start time, there was a Korean grocer named Sunja Do who ended up killing an African-American 13-year-old named Latasha Harlins, and the media created the synopsis killed over a $1.79 orange juice. And basically, ultimately, when the results of the trials came forth, literally within, I think, a 1 month period, Sunja Do also did not get any kind of jail time. And the media played a really, I feel like an unfortunate role in which they played those two videos of those accounts over and over. And so in a way, it tied two very different events that were unrelated with one another that really, I think, created a certain narrative about Black Korean conflict. And a lot of that anger was directed towards the Korean American community and the store owners, and over 2,300 Korean businesses were destroyed.
Wow, that's a lot of devastation for many businesses, especially Korean businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had also heard from Dr. Edward Cheng. He had shared before about the two media images that you mentioned. The Rodney King, Sunja Do is like one media story than the next. And although not really connected, somehow there became a connection.
Yes.
And perhaps those events kind of triggered the flashpoint for Saigu.
Yes.
Today, we want to go even before the flashpoint. Before that flashpoint, we definitely will go a little bit more into talking about that later. But let's go before the flashpoint. I know that you earlier, just even in this conversation, you talked about representation and lack of representation. But I know in session 1, you talked about Squid Games. We've all watched Squid Games on Netflix. It's I think that one of the most watched shows in Netflix history. What did you mean about the conditions in Los Angeles around that 1992 time, maybe even before Sunja Do and the Rodney King?
Sure.
How is the conditions like Squid Games?
Mm-hmm. So in the show Squid Game, the game master set a table in which, again, the players, the only way that they could come out with the final winning is hurting each other. But, he allowed the players to volunteer, like they weren't forced, right? But where they were not forced, even though they were not forced, their economic challenges forced them to play in this game because they were going to go bankrupt, they were going to commit suicide. I mean, if they didn't get this winning, monetary winning, like all hell would have broken loose in their life. And so in that way, they were very desperate. And they decided to, basically join this game that put their life at risk, but also ended up hurting and killing one another. And in the same way, first of all, there's first of all this U.S. history where communities of color have really been left out of the wealth building investments. So, for example, the U.S. government, I forgot the exactly, but basically we're giving out land and horses and things like that that allowed a lot of white people to be able to build wealth, right, and have land ownership. But then also after the war, the veterans, again, white veterans, were given the opportunity to buy homes, right, that allowed them to at a reduced, special interest rates and special, again, parameters that allow them to become homeowners, and their wealth continued to increase. Whereas with, basically African American, other communities of color veterans did not get that same opportunity. Not only that, but basically, in terms of they were landlocked, they could only buy homes in certain neighborhoods. And as such, the home value, and also they would not give out loans. And so in that way, each time you buy and sell, the home value tends to go up, right? But if you cannot buy and sell, your home value stays locked at the original price, right? So for the people who were, Caucasian, they were able to build wealth. And the vast majority of middle class in this country gain wealth through homeownership. Even today, there's a $200,000 difference in wealth between homeowners and renters. So there was that dimension. But in addition, a lot of the big companies, and I'm trying to recall what the impetus was, but a lot of the big, well-paying companies moved out. And so, again, the communities that were left behind, particularly in the African-American community, suffered. And there wasn't a source of income. So, again, there was all that tension, lack of wealth, lack of access to job opportunities, etc. And at the same time, the Korean community, there's the larger immigration history, but the 1965 Immigration Act, right, allowed immigrants, especially from Asia, who were prevented by legislation from coming into the United States, were finally allowed to come into. So there was the influx, and the part of the influx came from, again, poverty in our war-torn home countries, right? So people left their homeland, left their safety net to come to a new country in pursuit of the American dream. But particularly for the Korean community, they had high language barriers, right? And what business, what job opportunity, their whatever past degrees, it was irrelevant. It was not acknowledged in the United States. So many of them sought opportunities in businesses, right? And so where could they afford when they had very little income? And South Korean government only allowed people to bring $100 per family member, right? Well, so my family with 5 individuals, we only brought $500 to survive in the United States when you really don't have any connections, etc. Right? So again, a lot of these immigrants really worked hard to save a little bit of money to go buy businesses, and they can't buy it in Beverly Hills or Century City. They're going to be able to afford businesses in probably poorer neighborhoods. And so in that way, there was that conflict in terms of many of these store owners were buying convenience store or liquor stores or beauty supply stores, and there's no security. All the goods are sprawled out. The police don't respond. The people in the community want those goods, and so it really creates this very an environment in which tension and violence, right, could occur. And there was a lot of suspicion, and I think there was a narrative that's being told that these Asians or Koreans were getting special money from government that was not being given to the Black community. And so in essence that they were taking advantage or really stealing business opportunities that belong to the African American community. And at the same time, again, there's been this long period in which the African American talked about police brutality, but no one believed them. And and it's true that and with the Rodney King situation, it was caught on video for the first time. And so they really felt, the Black community felt that they would get their vindication finally, right? But when the verdict came and the police did not get any jail time, I could see a certain level of anger arising from the Black community. And on top of that, as mentioned, that tension of the Korean store owner, right, selling goods and having it all sprawled out, and there's poverty in the community, there's violence in the community, having that interaction without any police protection, any kind of interaction. And again, many of these immigrants, they're thrown into a situation, they're working very long hours, right? And it's a highly traumatizing environment. It's the second most dangerous job of being killed while working. So again, very little English skills, very vulnerable, right? And you're working long hours, no vacation. And so it's really a setup where they're not going to be the most friendly people. Again, it doesn't excuse them, but then also the constant, theft, shoplifting, gun violence also kind of puts the store owners in a very desperate situation in which they, out of despair, without any protection, end up, following certain individuals who look like they're about to take stuff as well. So again, it's a very unfortunate situation that has created this tension.
Wow, thank you for really helping us to understand, like before the Flashpoint, whether it's kind of like the context of what was happening in the 1990s. But I think you went even further back when you talked about like who could even come to the United States, who could even buy houses, who could even get loans, and there were some who just even actually just got land. I think it was like you mentioned, the Homestead Act of 1862. It's like if you could just get 160 acres, and
that's right. Well, that's what it was. I couldn't remember the details, so thank you for that.
Yeah, so imagine if you were the person that got 160 acres and then you passed it on to your descendants and your descendants, and you talked about that wealth building that some were able to tap into where others not as much, and they're just struggling to survive, and it seems like there's no way to gain wealth.
Yes.
That's kind of helping us to understand like how it was a little bit like Squid Games maybe. Now let's look at businesses. When we know that many Korean businesses were targeted. Now, if a person privately owns a business, I mean, like, aren't they rich? Like, aren't they rich if they privately own a business? That's what many people think.
Well, I want to first share the story of my husband's family, right? So at one point in Korea, their family was one of 3 businesses that introduced chewing gum in South Korea, right? And I heard that the other 2, one was Lotte, and there was, I don't know, was it Hete? Anyway, huge, like global conglomerates, right? But for his family, it just didn't work out. And so, they came to the United States, and because of language barriers and other things of that nature, my father-in-law ended up becoming a janitor for American Airlines. Maybe it was a, contracting job, but in essence. And, they're barely eking out a living. And it was only when my father-in-law had referred a client to an immigration attorney that he received, I believe it was $20,000 as like a referral fee, right? And basically that was his seed money to go buy a business. Obviously, 20,000 could only carry you so far, right? Even back then. But basically, he did two other things, which was he was able to find a Korean bank who would give him a loan. And studies have shown that Koreans and Asians also face the same kind of discrimination from financial institutions, right? And so that's why Korean banks came to be, because Koreans could not get loans from anyone else. So the Korean community ultimately set up their own banks. And studies show that there are more Asian-owned businesses when there's presence of Asian-owned banks. But anyway, so my father-in-law was able to get a loan from a Korean bank, but also the seller, the business owner, carried the loan for part of it. And so obviously, if you think about a 20,000, he was highly leveraged. And so, you know, yeah, he was definitely over leveraged or highly leveraged. And when he went in, he had to work very long hours. Basically, if you think about a business, especially like a liquor store or convenience store, they open from like 7 a.m. to like 2 a.m. in the morning. And I think I've shared with you, but I asked my husband, who used to be a business broker, but also ran these stores, how much do these stores make? And I was literally shocked. They make around 3 to 5, typical, liquor store or convenience store, they net about 3 to 5 thousand after expenses, but before payroll. And if you think about 7 a.m. to 2 a.m., you really need two shifts. You need someone at the cashier. You also need someone, helping with stocking. That's 4 employees. But with 3 to 5 thousand before payroll, how do you make that work? It's really not sustainable. The only way that you could make it work is one person working two shifts and using family labor. And so that's what happened with my father-in-law. And because of the long hours, for the first 3 years, Monday through Friday, he didn't come home. The business that he bought, there was a house attached to it, not a huge fancy house. So he would literally not come home, sleep at the house attached to the store. And then on Fridays after school, my husband would go and replace his father. And so my husband, for the 3 years, he basically on weekends was basically enslaved into that store and slept there. So that's kind of the reality for many of these business owners, that their margins I don't even want to call it margins. It's like they're basically working, and my husband did the calculation. It was less than minimum wage after they counted for the number of hours that they had to work. And so maybe it may appear that they are a business owner, but the reality of what they are actually being paid, especially in a very dangerous job that is traumatizing, is really, they're not rich at all.
So even though Korean Americans in the early 1990s may own businesses, you're saying that they were highly leveraged. It's probably the bank that owned most of the business, if you think about it, and they were able to run it because family was working,
Mm-hmm.
and family was oftentimes not paid. You're talking about your husband, and how old was he when he was running the
You know
shop for
what?
his father?
He had just, he did start school like a 1 year after the fact. They sometimes when you come to America, they kind of put you back. So after 8th grade, his dad surprised him with a new car. It was an Oldsmobile, which was not his favorite style, but basically the car was not to say, hey, go have fun or drive to school, but it was so that he could drive to work, for the father's business, so that he could help him. So starting in 9th grade, pretty much, as I said, he literally lived in that store. And I met him when he was just finishing college, and he was still, running and helping to run his dad's store as well.
Wow. So his father is working the first shift, and then he's just like a freshman in high school, and he's going to school, but then he's also after, I guess after he gets out of school, he goes straight to the
Right,
store and
on Friday.
works.
So literally on weekends, he lived at the store, right? Yeah.
All right. So now, would you say that these Asian store owners, that they made a lot of money and profit off of the community, which was already depressed economically?
Well, as I said before, they're literally netting 3 to 5,000, and when you take into consideration payroll, they're making less than minimum wage. And if I was to put a different framework, they're really providing a service, um, with putting their life on the line when so many others are not willing to provide that service in the community. And so again, I think the narrative that has been disseminated, has really been, I think, hurtful for both communities. And I think that, um, you know, part of the my motivation in telling a fuller, more accurate story is because, when you don't have clarity and accuracy of assessment of the situation, you're going to come up with wrong solutions because you haven't made a correct assessment. And I think I might have shared in the past, but if you need someone to jump and they refuse, you're not going to be happy with them. But if you learn that they're in a wheelchair, well, your feelings will shift a little bit, right? um, but more importantly, you're gonna stop yelling at them because it's futile to yell at someone in a wheelchair to jump. But it still doesn't take away now your need for them to jump. But knowing again that they're now in a wheelchair, you're going to come up with better solutions, right? You're not going to be just yelling at someone who just cannot do it. And unfortunately, I would say for many of these store owners, because of the perception that they are wealthy, they are rich, and that they're profiteering on the backs of the Black community or other communities, gives this perception of that they owe something to the local community. And I think the understanding or the recognition of the truth of the reality of these store owners, that they're literally, again, putting their life on the line, eking out like literally less than minimum wage to provide a service. I think, it will open eyes and open hearts, but also come with better solutions, right? Yelling at someone to hire locally, right? Or yelling at someone to provide better service when someone's just been traumatized, being held up at gunpoint, right? And literally no vacation, no holidays, working 16-hour day. Again, it doesn't excuse them, but recognizing the reality, you're going to come up with some better solutions. And I think that, I've given an example of, we run a program where we have a job training program. The pay comes from the government. We, as a job placement site, provide the training, and the individual gets job training and gets pay, right? And so if that could be a potential solution where a job placement program was placed in these stores, well, the store owner will get some extra help and a little break. And the individual will get some job training and get paid. Is a win for the community because you know what? They'll get better service, and someone who's unemployed that may cause problem now is employed, also paying taxes, right? So it's also a safer neighborhood. And you know what? I think for the store owner, they might even get a great ambassador because once someone is on the store owner side and see the reality that they face, they could be really a wonderful bridge as well. So again, it creates a win-win situation.
Thank you so much, Pin, for sharing such a personal story. Your husband, your father-in-law, and a little bit of their story. and kind of breaking down the stereotype of the model minority, which is often given to Asian Americans, that why can't you be more like this group, right? And what that does is it creates a wedge between other groups. And
Yes.
like you mentioned, some of that tension, which is going to lead to the flashpoint, as we know. But if we know the story, as you mentioned, then perhaps we could have a better solution, like what you mentioned and what your organization is doing as well. Um, I know that was in 1990 that we were just talking about, or maybe even earlier than that. But you actually shared with me a graph from 2022, Asian and Black businesses' poorest financial conditions. This is 2022, after COVID-19, the pandemic, kind of a little bit around that time. What was the condition of businesses? I know we economically many businesses were struggling, but what about what would you say about Asian and Black owned firms?
Well, first of all, we're in very similar plight. So the 2022 Federal Reserve Bank study looked at the financial conditions of business owners by ethnicity, and poor was the kind of the worst category. And surprisingly, I usually talk about Asians that because there's like 30, 50 groups under one umbrella of API, that you have to really disaggregate. Without disaggregating, it really masks the suffering of many of the subgroups. But in this situation, without even disaggregation, API business owners had the largest percentage of the worst, or the poor, that is called poor, was the worst condition, right? And then the next category was called fair. And again, even that portion, Asians had it the largest share. Now, so not surprisingly, the African American community had a comparable, but it was just right below Asians. But again, I think that those data points, and even Hispanics. So really, I think that communities of color, we are all victims of a very racist system. A racist system doesn't discriminate who it discriminates against, right? And so whether you're Black, brown, Native American, or Asian American, we all face the fact that we are not the in crowd. We are not historically the people who's held power in this country. And so again, we have so much shared pain, shared challenges, that I think it would be a lot of very much, a lot of positivity, a lot of hope if we were to stand in solidarity. I do want to go back. So 8 years after the 92 riots, the 2000 census looked upon again the income, the median income of different groups. Koreans, along with Black, Brown, and Native Americans, were four communities whose median income was below the national median. And so and Koreans have one of the highest rates, if not the highest rate, of self-employment. And though self-employment was not out of aspiration, but lack of options. You know, when you again have limited language skills, all your license, learning doesn't matter in the United States. So your options of what you could do is very limited. And so sometimes you end up being self-employed, not again out of aspiration, but lack of options. And I think that's why if you look at the income, the median income of Koreans, it was quite low with other communities of color, right? And so I think it reinforces and supports the fact that, Koreans are not, were not doing well. And so we were all stuck together, right, with one another. And is again my hope that the sooner we awaken to that truth, that reality, that that we would start fighting less with one another, just as in that Squid Game, when the final two contestants, lifelong friends, and as the final contestant was going to enter into his winning, he woke up and he realized, oh my gosh, you know what? I've been played. And you know what? This winning is going to come at the cost of losing my friend who would have been killed right away, and that of his own conscience and integrity. And so again, And he remembered, as bad as the game master was, he did say one thing. He said, if the players agree to leave, all the players agree to leave, they can leave the game. They can choose to leave the game and no longer play by those rules. And that's what, he woke up and he said, we don't have to play by these rules. Let's go home. And I really want to, I challenge myself because, again, I'm human. It's very easy to go into a default place of pointing fingers at one another. But at the end of the day, if we do that, we're being played against one another. And the sooner we awake, the better off we will be.
Thank you for just helping us to understand a little bit about the finances of Asian American and Black businesses, and even to today, 2022. I bet if we disaggregated by ethnicity among Asian Americans, I bet Korean Americans would still be even lower than
Yes.
than many Asian Americans. But even in this grouping, Asian Americans were hit the hardest during the season, similar to Black. And you're saying that, wow, this can create an opportunity for solidarity, understanding, hey, everyone's really struggling and suffering together, and maybe by working together we can make it a better place. But somehow that's been difficult. But I know I've been one of the objectives and goals, strategies that you've had include looking at the data. So thank you for sharing that graph with me. I kind of want to talk a little bit about the safety conditions and working in a Korean convenience store. I haven't had the opportunity to do that, and I know many people probably listening have not worked in, maybe LA, in a convenience store, in a laundry or a gas station. What was it like in 1990 working in that kind of environment?
Well, I personally have not worked at a store, but the stories that I have heard through my parents, not through my parents, through my husband, as well as senior workers who have run these businesses, whether it's beauty store supplies or liquor stores or other contacts, they have a very consistent story in which, again, they're working very long hours. And it is a very dangerous job. Until about 3 years ago, every person that I had met who had run these stores, 100% had been held up at gunpoint. And to tell you how ridiculous in terms of the lack of police response, my husband was sharing that he had been held up at gunpoint and he pushed whatever button to call the police. They didn't come back. They didn't come until an hour later, long after, the situation. And my husband basically said, like, what happened? Why are you, coming now? And the most ridiculous response was they didn't want to create a hostage situation. That was their response. Uh, it's just, and so for, again, these store owners, they're left on their own with no help. And so again, they're desperate. If you're working and making less than minimum wage, every item that gets shoplifted, and I have to say, many of them have learned to take cigarettes, which are very expensive, has become even more expensive, right? That they're being taken, and every item, like I said, every dollar, every $10, every $20, that's like a life or death situation, right? And many times I've heard stories where they will come and literally have bags or very big jackets to the point where they're stuffing everything, right? And to the point they can't even hardly move, but everything's captured on video. And basically when they confront, the people would deny. And it's only like if they were to actually open up the bag that they would show evidence. And it's really, again, an unfortunate situation. I think if I was a customer, walked in somewhere and they accused me of, shoplifting, and they grabbed my purse and opened it, I think I would never ever enter that store. I think I would call the police, right? So again, it's a very unfortunate situation in which really the two communities, as a store owner and as a customer, that they're being put in conflict with one another. As an organization, we've done a commemoration of series of events on the 20th, 25th, and the 30th anniversary. And at the end of each of these anniversary events, I learned something that I didn't realize before. And, during the initial LA riots, I kept on hearing Black Korean conflict, which I had never heard of, right? But, with all the media, again, reinforcing that message, it was kind of buried in my head. Although, again, every day I had lots of great relationships, right, with leaders in the Black community. Again, some of my strongest mentors, supporters have come from the Black community, for which I'm very grateful for. But I think probably like at the 20th or 25th anniversary, I came to realize, you know what? No, it's not a Black and Korean conflict. It's a Korean store owner / Black customer conflict. But on the 30th anniversary, we did series of talks, and there was a professor, African American from Biola University, who was sharing about basically the great relationship he had with his dry cleaner, his Korean mechanic, right? And it kind of dawned on me, you know what? It's not even Korean business owner / Black customer. It's really probably in the two contexts of usually the liquor store or Korean store owner, a convenience store owner, and also the beauty supply. In that context, is unique in that pretty much the store owner, they're really outnumbered. They're under resourced, right? So like I said, they're barely like having enough staff, right? So the goods are all sprawled out, right, out in the open. And usually they're in neighborhoods where, again, there's high poverty, high need. And those goods are things that are needed and wanted. And again, that is kind of a unique setting in which it creates opportunities for conflict and tension. And I think that as our communities, again, helping to define more clearly where the conflict arises is really human response to human conditions, and not a kind of a racist thing on either side, right? I think that is really important. And if you are able to see it as a human response to create conditions created by human beings, I think then there is a more hope and better chance of being able to solve that issue. Because if they're created by humans, right, then we could undo those decisions by humans, right? But if you define someone in wholesale and say, oh, they're racist or they're criminals or whatever, then that's a harder hill to climb. And so I really hope that we could do better in looking at what human decisions are creating these conditions that elicit a human response.
Yes, would definitely wish for better human responses, but I know that there have been some tough human responses that have not been good. So just looking again at the stress in these spaces for the store owners, I know you mentioned your husband being even held up at gunpoint, and that every Korean store owner that and you work in LA and you work with many store owners, that every single one have had that experience. I can't imagine what that would be like to have a weapon in my face like that. And because it's not just that moment, it's also the trauma afterwards, because
yes,
you just can't forget an event like that. You're thinking about your family, you're thinking about your life.
Right.
Was the threat ever real, though? Was it only just the brandishing of weapons, or was the threat real?
No, people have been hurt, killed. Like I said, it's the second most dangerous job of being killed while working. So this is like the second most dangerous job. This is real, right? And at the risk of being potentially misunderstood, again, what happened with Latasha Harlins is just unacceptable. She should never have died, right? She should never have been killed. And at the same time, I really want to say that in the situation of Sunja-ju, again, not to absolve her of her, actions. At the same time, I think the reality that she faced is not unsimilar to the challenges that many of the store owners face. In the court documents, I read that she was experiencing shoplifting 40 times a week. I don't know for me if my margins were that razor thin, right? Even someone shoplifting once a week would just drive me nuts, right? But 40 times a week, they had been threatened of having their store burned like 20 times, right? And they were held up, I believe, at gunpoint, robbed 30 times, and her son's life was being threatened um, by gang members because he was going to be a witness against them for robbing their store. So, and again, that kind of reality is not something unique with Sunja-do, but again, the reality that so many of these store owners face. And I have to say, like the LA riots, that was over 30 plus years, 32, 33. And so you kind of wonder, well, you know what, maybe things are better. But I think it was an article in the LA Times. I think it's been now 2 years, where a Korean family had run a store for over a decade, if not longer, in Long Beach. And they were about to retire and sell their store. And the daughter was sharing about how they did not have a decent family photo because the whole family, right, had little been, tied to this business, no vacation, no holidays, etc. And finally, right, they're going to get this break. And, right before the store was going to be sold and, passed on, someone came in and either shot or stabbed the mom in the back of the neck, that left her paralyzed and she could not speak. And when I hear that story, I find it so heartbreaking, that, again, this family, literally poured all their life, soul, whatever, family, everything, to really like try to achieve their American dream and finally be able to enjoy what looked like in retirement, right? And the violence that they faced and just the devastation, the loss of everything that they had worked for, is real and it's tangible. And the current whole anti-Asian violence, the anti-Asian hate that doesn't stop, hasn't stopped, is real even today. And all these store owners, even now, they're being held at gunpoint, and they're not getting the same kind of police response as well. So that reality did not just happen in the LA riots back then, but it's being lived out even right now.
Yes, we're definitely not hearing that story. The story of many of these Korean businesses, scores being robbed and beaten, and then held at gunpoint. And also, you shared a stat with me that kind of startled me. In 1992, between those 2 years, January 1990 to May
Mm-hmm.
1992, I saw that you had written 25 Korean shop owners had been murdered during
Yeah.
that 2 year period prior
Yeah.
to the event that triggered Saigu.
Well, so actually it was during and afterwards, right? So leading to, and again, that was one data that I was able to capture. So again, I clearly remember coming home during that whole season. And, I was an MBA student, and we would have group meetings, group projects, and I would come home around 10 o'clock at night. And that was when my parents always had the Korean news come on, right? And during that season, it literally did feel like every night there was some news on Korean news of some store owner who was killed while running a business. And, you know, I have said this before, that if I was African American and did not hear anything except for what I heard on the news and that constant juxtaposition between the Rodney King beating and the Sunjadu Latasha Harlan shooting, right? That, and you know, whatever I may have experienced walking into a store and the store owner, you know, following me around, maybe, you know, or being rude. Although I do have to say, you know, Korean male, although Jeff, you are a very friendly guy, but I would say our first generation Korean parents, you know, they're kind of the stoic and da 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 da. So again, I would say, you know, whether you're black, brown, or anyone, you know, these Korean older male figures would not be the most friendly person, right? So I do want to put that out there. But anyway, to run into those kind of situations, I would conclude, yeah, you know, those Korean store owners, I don't know even to say they deserve it or, you know, whatever, but my anger would be really at that flashpoint. Because of particular the game that the media played. I just wonder how things would be so drastically different if the media also played the news accounts of the 25 store owners who were also killed while doing business. I think that the narrative perhaps would be much more clear, more widened, that, and it would not necessarily just be a racist thing or someone who is arrogant, but really, again, the reality of the danger that these store owners face. Again, it doesn't absolve anything in terms of excuse, because at the bottom line, I know how pissed I'd be when I get bad customer service. But perhaps, again, coming alongside these store owners who are struggling, you know, and finding programs like the job training program or marketing assistance or some kind of reprieve that would help these business owners do better, earn better revenues, give them, again, that reprieve, better customer service training, whatever, that I think would ease the tension and, you know, set people up for greater success instead of just writing them off as being racist. I know that, you know, I have seen many leaders really, again, create a narrative that says, hey, you know, like when people, young people are causing problems, right? Committing crimes, whatever. You know, one approach is to say, let's send them to prison. But I think studies have shown that doing that alone doesn't really, again, solve, you know, society's problems at all, right? But to actually ask the question, why are they behaving this way, right? And whether it's broken homes or poverty or, you know, police brutality, gang violence, whatever it is, and to come alongside to find, again, better human, creating better human conditions that will create a very different human response. I would challenge our elected officials to ask the same question about these store owners if they are behaving in such a way that our society does not desire, right? But I do have to say, I cannot imagine what store owner would want to be following some customer around the store, right? I just can't imagine, but it's an act of desperation, right? That I think because they're getting no help. And so again, going back, what are the human conditions creating this human response? And if we could change or address those human conditions, I think we'll come out with better solutions.
Wow, so we have these Korean store owners, long hours, low profit margins, constant threat of safety, things getting stolen, mental health trauma, PTSD. What do you think is the true cost of working in a Korean convenience store? So not just the salary, but what do you think is the true cost?
Well, I think broken families too. If the parents are enslaved to the store, they're not going to have great family relationships. And if the children are also enslaved to the store, um, the full potential of what they could be and also what the store owners could be, I think, are lost. Um, and in addition to that, again, I think these store owners, if they are given the right support, they could provide better service. They could be able to provide greater revenues that will create more taxes that they could contribute to society. I could potentially see them becoming better members of the greater community when you have a little breathing space, right? And again, bad customer service is a kill, right, to the business. And I don't think any store owner wants to do poorly in their business. So I think there's a lot of losses and that tension, loss of lives, loss of, again, what it could be.
I think hearing about the true cost is kind of really debunking that model minority myth, especially in 1992 in K-Town convenience store owner. This is not a model minority story, is it?
No, and again, it's a myth. And unfortunately, in the 1960s, Time magazine, I think that's when, the whole protest, particularly from Black leaders, and other minorities, including Asians, joining in. But it was really, again, when people of color were making noise and fighting against racism, protesting against racism. They wanted to kind of create a counter narrative and, again, pit communities of color against one another. And so they manufactured this story about, particularly, it was the Japanese that they did highlight, to say, hey, look at these Japanese, they're minorities and they're doing quite well, they're smart, and what's your problem, other communities of color, right? But it only took a little slice. And again, the vast majority of Asian Americans, we're suffering. Each of us face different challenges, but at the end of the day, it's a racist system that really does not want to relinquish their power and their privilege. And I think, again, that's what we want to awaken to.
And final question for today. So as we struggle to really understand the roots of Saigu, as we're trying to make sense of it, how can today's episode help us to, you provided the acronym for Saigu, serve, advocate, inspire, give, unite. What are the lessons we can take away from episode 2 that you think would help us to serve more, advocate, inspire, give, unite? I know you touched on a couple things, but...
Well, I think that inspire, in spite of all the challenges that these store owners face, there's some really inspiring stories of how they really do serve the community. And even after the LA riots, the devastation, many actually, instead of running away and abandoning, they chose to go back. And I think there's also really great inspiring stories of, again, different communities of color banding together and working and supporting one another, right? And then also, again, service, the fact that we all of us are facing the same challenges, especially economic challenges that have been really manufactured. The poverty that of communities of color have been manufactured and legislated, right? And so it is an opportunity, again, to unite, to create better opportunities, better services, right? Access to opportunities and services to be able to, again, do better and to serve one another, right? Or is it advocate? Again, same challenges, shared challenges. We can band together again to advocate for better opportunities for all, including the white community. I've been to the Appalachians. The abject poverty there is mind-blowing. I cannot imagine that this is America in the 20th century or 21st century. Really, it's shocking. It's shocking. No bus service, no car, no hotels, no restaurants. I mean, it's just like mind-blowing as well. Give. I think that when we give of one another, whether it's actually our dollars, but really, again, giving our gifts. And I have been so blessed that so many communities of color, but especially for leaders from the Black community, have given generously. In return, as an organization, many of like the home ownership program, we could help people up to $300,000 in down payment assistance, right? It's like unbelievable. But we were able to partner with the different ethnic employee associations and be able to provide this great service and resource, not just to the Korean or Asian community, but really all the different ethnic communities as well. So there's, again, each of us, we all have God-given talents and gifts, and we could share and give to one another and to be a blessing to the broader community. And what is this? Saigu, give and unite. As I said, unity. There's so many ways that we could be blessed when we do stand in solidarity.
Wow, thank you so much, Hipin, for sharing a little bit of background before the flashpoint of Saigu to give some context on this very complex situation. We know, though, that as we're hearing some of these stories emerge, it creates understanding. If there's any strategies to do something about it, that creates then promising practices, not just for K-Town in 1992, but LA today in 2024.
Absolutely.
Or all of California. It could work in LA, could work in California, if California, the United States. And then many people are looking to see, how do these multiracial communities build peace, work together? This is a lesson that can go beyond the United States as well.
And I'm looking forward to a future episode where I could share just some amazing stories, inspiring stories in which we have been able to come together.
Oh, there's so many. There's so many that I want to ask you today. I was just thinking about community members that you've reached out to, mentors. I know that, Hipin, you're just a leader in the community in multiracial groups. How do you do that? Sharing some examples. I know we don't have time today, but I'm looking forward to hearing some of those stories, because that is the question that many people have. Many people don't know how to do that. They don't have experience doing that, but you've had many decades of experience working in the community in one of the most complex situations. And so I think there's some lessons that you've learned that's going to benefit a lot of people.
And I'm looking forward to sharing them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.